You can feel it in the marrow of your bones before you actually hear it. A low-frequency hum, more of a vibration than a sound, vibrating through the soles of your feet and up into your chest. It is the rhythmic thumping of 9 tons of muscle and thick matted fur moving across the permafrost. Then the smell hits you, a heavy, suffocating wall of damp wool, musk, and ancient earth. It's the kind of scent that tells your lizard brain, in no uncertain terms, that you are no longer at the top of the food chain. You look up, and the sky is blocked out by a creature 13 feet tall at the shoulder, carrying tusks long enough to bridge a 2-lane highway. Your heart is hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird, and all you have in your hand is a piece of sharpened wood. Most of us have had that nightmare where you're trying to run, but your legs feel like they're made of lead, or you're trying to scream, but no sound comes out. That feeling of being completely, laughably outmatched is usually a sign that it's time to wake up. But for our ancestors, that wasn't a dream. It was a Tuesday. It's the ultimate underdog story, the kind of mismatch that shouldn't just be difficult, it should be impossible. If you saw a toddler trying to take down a main battle tank with a plastic spork, you wouldn't call it a fight, you'd call it a tragedy. Yet, when we look at the actual evidence left behind in the dirt, the story changes completely. We find mammoth ribs with stone points lodged in the bone. We find massive butchery sites where dozens of these giants were processed with surgical precision. It turns out that for hundreds of thousands of years, the underdogs were actually the most terrifying thing on the landscape. Think about the last time you had to move a heavy sofa or a refrigerator. You probably struggled, groaned, and maybe even called a friend for help. And that's just dealing with an inanimate object that doesn't have the option of stomping you into a pancake. Now imagine that the sofa is alive, weighs 18,000 pounds, and is covered in armor-plated skin and freezing mud. This is the relatable hurdle our ancestors faced every single day. We are soft, slow, and remarkably fragile. We don't have claws to rend flesh or fangs to pierce hide. We don't even have a thick coat of fur to protect us from the biting wind. We are, by almost every physical metric, the least likely candidates for the role of apex predator. But we had one thing that changed the math entirely. We had the ability to look at a problem and refuse to play by the rules. We didn't try to outmuscle the mammoth. We decided to outthink the very laws of physics that gave the mammoth its advantage. It wasn't about being stronger. It was about being clever enough to make the mammoth's own strength its biggest weakness. This wasn't a sudden flash of insight, either. It was a slow-motion revolution in engineering and strategy that started much earlier than most people realize. Engineering was our first real act of rebellion. If you asked a random person on the street when humans started using sophisticated weapons, they'd probably guess maybe 10 or 20,000 years ago. They'd be wrong by an order of magnitude. In the mid-1990s, archaeologists working in a coal mine in Schöningen, Germany, pulled something out of the mud that effectively broke our understanding of human history. They found a set of wooden spears that were so perfectly preserved and so masterfully crafted that they looked like they could have been made yesterday. But when the labs ran the dates, the numbers were staggering. These spears were roughly 300,000 years old. To put that in perspective, that's long before modern humans even existed. These were likely the tools of Homo heidelbergensis, an ancestral species we often dismiss as primitive. These weren't just sharpened sticks. When researchers analyzed the Schöningen spears, they found that the center of gravity was positioned exactly like a modern Olympic javelin. The wood, mostly slow-growing spruce and pine, had been harvested and shaped with a specific aerodynamic balance in mind. They were designed to be thrown with high precision and significant force. At that same site, researchers found the remains of at least 50 horses that had been systematically butchered. This wasn't a one-off lucky break. It was a sustained, professional hunting operation. These ancient people were studying horse behavior, selecting prime targets, and using high-velocity projectiles to take them down from a distance. They were already thinking like engineers 300,000 years ago. But as impressive as a 300,000-year-old javelin is, a horse is not a mammoth. You can kill a horse with a well-aimed throw. If you try to kill a mammoth by throwing a spear at it, you're basically just annoying it. The hide of an Ice Age mammoth could be over an inch thick, backed by layers of dense fat and muscle that act like organic ballistic gel. A human arm, no matter how much time it spends at the gym, simply cannot generate enough kinetic energy to drive a stone-tipped spear deep enough to reach a vital organ. The physics just don't work. For decades, this was the great how of archaeology. If we couldn't throw hard enough to kill them, how are the bones covered in our spear marks? The answer finally arrived in 2024 from a team at UC Berkeley, and it involves a strategy that is as brilliant as it is terrifying. The Berkeley researchers, led by Scott Byram, propose that we've been looking at prehistoric spear tips all wrong. We've always imagined hunters running up and stabbing or throwing, but the researchers suggested something called pike hunting. Instead of trying to provide the force ourselves, we let the mammoth do it. The strategy was to brace the butt of a long, heavy spear, a pike, firmly against the ground, perhaps even wedging it against a rock or a root. The hunter would then angle the stone point upward, right at the chest or neck of a charging animal. When a 9-ton mammoth charges at 20 miles an hour and hits a fixed, braced point, the amount of force generated is astronomical. It's not a spear anymore. It's a biological collision. The animal's own momentum drives the stone point deep into its chest cavity. But here is the truly hollow point part of the engineering. The Berkeley team found that the famous Clovis points, those iconic fluted stone tips found all over North America, were designed to function like a modern expandable bullet. Once the tip entered the flesh, the force of the impact would cause the wooden shaft to splinter and the stone point to twist, creating a massive, ragged wound channel that caused catastrophic internal bleeding. The mammoth wasn't being killed by a human. It was being killed by its own weight and its own anger. It was a trap made of physics. However, a braced pike only works if the mammoth is actually running toward you. This brings us to the second pillar of the hunt, the art of the manipulate. You can have the best pike in the world, but if the mammoth is just standing there calmly eating grass, you're just a guy holding a stick. To make the physics trap work, you need to turn a calm animal into a panicked one, and you need to guide that panic in a very specific direction. This required a level of group coordination that most modern organizations would envy. We're talking about a group of 20 or 30 people with no radios and no written plans, executing a high-stakes maneuver where a single mistake meant someone got flattened. In the state of Mexico, near a town called Tultepec, archaeologists recently discovered something that changed the scale of how we view this coordination. They found man-made pits, specifically designed to trap mammoths, dating back about 15,000 years. These weren't small holes. They were massive, vertical-walled trenches about 6 feet deep and 70 feet long. But the most incredible part wasn't the size of the pits, it was the timeline. Evidence showed that these pits were used and maintained by the same groups of people for over 500 continuous years. Imagine that for a second. That is 20 generations of the same family, returning to the same spot, cleaning out the same holes, and passing down the exact same secret techniques for luring a mammoth into a trap. This wasn't a desperate struggle for survival. This was a multi-generational infrastructure project. It suggests that these hunters had a deep, intimate understanding of mammoth migration routes. They knew exactly where the animals would be and when. They weren't chasing the food. They were waiting for the food to come to them. This wasn't just about digging holes, though. To get a mammoth into a pit, you have to drive it. This involves using fire, noise, and precisely timed movements to funnel a herd into a bottleneck. We see evidence of this at sites like La Côte de Saint-Blélade on the island of Jersey. There, at the base of a massive cliff, researchers found the bones of dozens of mammoths and rhinoceroses. For a long time, the theory was that Neanderthals literally chased entire herds off the cliff to their deaths. While some modern researchers think the cliff jump might be an oversimplification, the fact remains that humans were using the landscape as a force multiplier. They would find a natural box canyon or a steep drop-off and use it to finish the fight that their own bodies weren't strong enough to win. But sometimes the landscape doesn't provide a cliff or a pit. Sometimes it's just you, your friends, and a very large animal on an open plain. This is where we move from engineering and traps to the most human weapon of all, the radiator. This is a strategy called persistence hunting, and it's something almost no other creature on Earth can do as well as we can. Most large mammals are built for speed and power. A mammoth can outrun you in a sprint, no question. But most large mammals have a major design flaw. They can't shed heat while they're moving. They have to stop to pant. If they keep running, their internal body temperature will climb until their brain literally starts to cook. Humans, on the other hand, are covered in millions of sweat glands. We are essentially walking, talking radiators. We can dump heat while we are in motion. A group of human hunters could pick out a single mammoth and just keep walking. Every time the mammoth tried to stop and rest, the humans would appear on the horizon, shouting and waving. The mammoth would have to get up and run again. After 4, 6, or 8 hours of this, the mammoth would eventually hit a physiological wall. Its muscles would seize, its heart would labor, and it would eventually collapse from sheer heat exhaustion. It didn't matter how big the tusks were if the animal was too tired to lift its own head. It's almost embarrassing how simple it is. We didn't win because we were the best fighters. We won because we were the best at not stopping. We weaponized our own stamina. Now, consider the mental overhead required for all of this. To run a persistence hunt, to maintain a trap for 500 years, or to brace a pike against a charging mastodon, you need a level of mutual trust that is almost hard to comprehend in our modern, cynical world. You had to know that the person standing next to you wasn't going to run when the 9-ton monster started screaming. You had to know that the people on the other side of the ridge were doing their part of the drive at exactly the right time. Many evolutionary biologists now believe that this specific pressure, the need to hunt big, dangerous animals, is exactly what pushed the human brain to grow so large. We didn't get smart and then start hunting mammoths. We started hunting mammoths and had to get smart to survive it. Language likely evolved not just to share stories, but to coordinate these life-or-death maneuvers. Our capacity for deep social bonding and empathy isn't just a nice trait. It was a survival requirement. The mammoth, in a very real way, was the architect of the human mind. We are who we are because we spent 200,000 years trying to figure out how to kill something 10 times our size. It was a relationship built on blood and respect. At that Tultepec site in Mexico, researchers found something that adds a layer of depth to this story. They found that after the mammoths were butchered, the hunters didn't just toss the bones aside. In some cases, they arranged the shoulder blades and tusks in careful, intentional patterns around the skulls. It looks remarkably like a ritual. It suggests that even though these people were killing these animals on an industrial scale, they recognized the gravity of what they were doing. They weren't just harvesting meat. They were interacting with a giant that sustained their entire community. Every part of the mammoth was used: the hide for tents and clothing, the bones for tools and fuel, the fat for light. To kill a mammoth was to ensure your family's survival for a year. It was a sacred act of violence. But success has a dark side, and it's a side we are still grappling with today. For a long time, we liked to believe that the great extinction at the end of the last ice age was just a climate change problem. The world got warmer, the grass changed, and the mammoths just couldn't handle it. But as our mapping of ancient hunting sites gets better, a more uncomfortable truth is emerging. Climate change definitely put the mammoths under stress, but it was likely the human factor that pushed them over the edge. We were too good at what we did. Our pikes were too sharp, our traps were too effective, and our coordination was too perfect. We didn't just hunt for food. We hunted with a level of efficiency that the natural world wasn't prepared for. When you combine a rapidly changing environment with a predator that can weaponize physics and landscape, the outcome is almost inevitable. By about 10,000 years ago, the giants were mostly gone. The very ingenuity that allowed us to survive the Ice Age may have also been the thing that silenced the rumble of those 9-ton footsteps forever. It's a sobering thought. The first time we truly mastered a technology, we used it to accidentally delete the most impressive creatures on the planet. This brings us to a weirdly relatable realization about our own modern lives. We still use these same underdog strategies today. We still use cooperation to solve problems that are too big for one person. We still use engineering to bypass our physical limitations. We've traded pikes for power grids and trap pits for global supply chains. But the underlying logic hasn't changed. We are still the soft, slow primate that refuses to play by the rules of the jungle. The story of the mammoth hunt isn't just a story about ancient history. It's a mirror. It shows us our capacity for brilliance, our necessity for community, and our terrifying ability to change the world around us. We are the species that looks at a 9-ton giant and sees a puzzle to be solved rather than a monster to be feared. That is a powerful, dangerous, and deeply beautiful thing. It also reminds us that being the underdog is only a disadvantage if you're playing the other guy's game. The mammoth played a game of strength, size, and power. We showed up and played a game of gravity, heat dissipation, and social contracts. We didn't win by being better mammoths. We won by being the best version of ourselves. Next time you feel overwhelmed by a problem that seems too big to handle, just remember that your ancestors used to stare down 13-foot-tall walls of muscle with nothing but a stick and a plan. They didn't have armor or claws, but they had each other, and they had a very good grasp of how momentum works. That's a pretty good legacy to carry around. It's easy to feel small in a world full of giants, but small is exactly where the most interesting solutions come from. Our entire history is a testament to the fact that you don't need to be the biggest thing in the room to be the one who decides how the story ends. You just need to be the one who knows where to plant the spear. And maybe that's the most important takeaway of all. We aren't just the survivors of the Ice Age. We're the descendants of the people who looked at the impossible and said, I think I can make a hole for that. That kind of confidence is built into our DNA, forged in the freezing wind and the smell of damp wool. It's a legacy of redirected force and shared burdens. So how did we do it? How did a species with no natural weapons become the master of the giants? We did it by realizing that the ground is harder than a mammoth's chest. We did it by realizing that sweat is better than speed. We did it by realizing that 20 people who trust each other are more powerful than 1,000 tusks. We didn't conquer the Ice Age with our fists. We conquered it with our connections. We turned our fragility into our greatest strength. And in doing so, we built the world we live in today. The transition from prey to predator wasn't a physical change. It was a mental one. It was the moment we stopped looking at the mammoth as a threat and started looking at it as a resource. That shift in perspective is the single most important event in human history. It's the foundation of everything from agriculture to space travel. It's the can-do attitude of a primate that just won't stay in its lane. But it's worth asking, what happened to that reverence we saw at Tultepec? As our tools got better and our traps got bigger, did we lose that sense of respect for the giants we were toppling? As we moved from stone pikes to steam engines and beyond, did we forget that we are still part of the same system that the mammoth once ruled? The bones arranged around the skulls suggest a connection that we might be losing in our high-tech, high-speed world. Maybe the real lesson of the mammoth hunt isn't about how to kill, but about how to live in a world that is much bigger than you are. It's about finding the balance between the ingenuity that lets us survive and the wisdom that lets us sustain. We are very good at the first part. We are still working on the second. But for now, just imagine that vibration in the ground one more time. Imagine the cold, the smell, and the sheer, overwhelming scale of the challenge. Then imagine your grandfather's grandfather's grandfather standing his ground, feeling the weight of the pike in his hands, and nodding to the friend standing next to him. That is where we come from. That is the fire in our blood. We should be proud of that soft, slow, clever ancestor. They did the impossible so that we could be here to talk about it. They took the unfair fight and they made it theirs. But here is the detail that should genuinely keep you up at night. While we were busy perfecting the art of the mammoth trap, we were also setting a trap for ourselves. By the year 1650 BC, while the Great Pyramids of Giza had already been standing for nearly 1,000 years, a tiny, shivering population of woolly mammoths was still alive on a remote scrap of land called Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean. They were the very last of their kind, a final, fading echo of the Ice Age, struggling to survive on an island that was slowly disappearing. They didn't die out because of a dramatic spear fight or a massive pit trap. They died out because they were alone. Their genetic diversity withered to nothing, waiting for a world that had already moved on without them. The fight didn't end with a bang. It ended with a quiet, lonely silence on a frozen rock 3,674 years ago. We didn't just win the war, we outlived the memory of it. If you're glad you don't have to face a 9-ton giant on your way to work tomorrow, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button. It's a lot safer than pike hunting, and we've got plenty more rabbit holes to explore. What do you think was the most unfair advantage we had? Let me know in the comments.